My name is Julia, and I was my mother's firstborn child during a time when she was trying to rebuild her life. Looking back now, I can see how young and hopeful she was when she married my father, Stephen, right after high school. They were so in love, choosing romance over financial security, but like many young love stories, it didn't last. I was still just a little girl when my mother met Jeffrey, a wealthy businessman with a luxury car and an air of sophistication about him. She left my father, taking me with her, maintaining contact only through child support checks that arrived punctually each month. At first, Jeffrey seemed kind enough, offering me candies and letting me play in his impressive office filled with gleaming awards and expensive furniture. But I noticed how my mother changed when she was around him, the way she would look at me as if I was a reminder of a past she desperately wanted to forget. One night, during what was supposed to be my TV time, I overheard their conversation in the kitchen that would haunt me for years to come. My mother's words cut through the air like ice when she told Jeffrey how much I resembled Stephen, always asking questions with the same questioning look in my eyes. Although I was too young to fully understand the weight of her words then, the pain of being discussed like a problem child carved itself deep into my heart. I loved my real father with all my heart, despite his modest circumstances. Sure, he lived in a small apartment on the other side of town, but our time together was filled with simple joys. Those afternoons in the park and sharing cheap pizza slices were worth more than all of Jeffrey's wealth. That night's conversation became permanently etched in my memory, and as time passed, my mother's criticism only grew harsher. She would constantly tell me how I couldn't do anything right, whether I was trying to help around the house or just doing my homework in the living room. My father, though, was different. He was my beacon of support. Whenever I showed him my report cards or school artwork, he would beam with pride and tell me how well I was doing. He would always remind me never to let anyone tell me I wasn't good enough. Life in Jeffrey's house became increasingly stressful as my mother's expectations grew more demanding. When I started school, she became obsessed with appearances, constantly lecturing me about proper dress and suitable boys. The day after being scolded for tracking mud in the hallway, I finally found the courage to stand up for myself. I told her that my father would never yell about a little dirt, and the slap came so fast I felt the sting before I realized what had happened. Her face was inches from mine as she warned me never to talk about Jeffrey that way, her breath a mix of coffee and anger. I held back my tears, just as my father had taught me to be strong. That night, lying in bed, I made a silent vow not to cry, refusing to give her that satisfaction. When my mother announced her pregnancy, the atmosphere in the house shifted palpably. I could sense a big change coming, and my instincts told me it wasn't going to be in my favor. She had that special pregnancy glow, but none of it was ever directed at me. She proudly announced she was having a child with the man she truly loved. One afternoon, as she caressed her growing belly with Jeffrey beaming like he'd won an award, she declared that everything would be perfect. Jeffrey added, in his characteristic charming tone, that they needed to renovate the guest room to make it suitable for their princess. My heart sank as I realized they were talking about my room, my small sanctuary in their world. When I asked about what would happen to my room, trying to keep my voice steady, my mother's smile turned rigid and cold. My mother told me, with a finality that left no room for discussion, that I would be moving to the smaller room because the baby needed space, as if that was somehow fair. So I packed up my life and moved into what was barely more than a closet, the smallest room in the house. Time flew by in a blur until Chloe was born, and suddenly she became everyone's favorite topic of conversation. I would hear my mother on the phone with her friends, gushing about how they'd never seen such a beautiful baby, cradling Chloe like she was the most precious thing in the world. I tried to join in, whispering that yes, she was beautiful, but that word wasn't enough to describe her. Chloe was truly adorable, and I couldn't help but love her from the moment I first saw her. I wanted so desperately to be a good big sister, to be involved and helpful. One afternoon, while my mother was busy in the kitchen, I tried to sneak into Chloe's room. I tiptoed in and peered over the crib at my baby sister, who was making happy little sounds. I whispered, "Hello, Chloe," and reached out my finger for her to grab. But my mother must have sensed my presence, because she appeared in the doorway with a voice sharp as a knife. She demanded to know what I was doing, reminding me that I was supposed to ask permission before entering the room. I protested that I just wanted to see her, feeling that familiar sting of tears behind my eyes. But my father was different during our weekend visits to our favorite pizza place, where he would listen to me with understanding. When I told him how Mom always seemed tense when I was near Chloe, like she thought I might break her, he thought carefully before responding. He explained gently that some people struggle with sharing love, as if it were a limited resource, but reminded me that I had a big heart and shouldn't let my mother's attitude change that. His words helped a little, but back at Mother's house, the distance between us only grew wider. Whenever I tried to talk about school or friends, she would half listen while keeping her eyes fixed on Chloe. One day, I came home clutching my second-place certificate from the science fair, excited and hopeful. I held it out like a ticket for her approval while she was feeding Chloe, exclaiming, "Look, Mom. I won this." Without even looking up, she murmured that it was nice, telling me to just put it on the refrigerator. I stood there, feeling the hollowness of her words as I hung the certificate slightly crooked on the fridge. Stepping back, I realized it was just another piece of paper, lost in Chloe's shadow. By the time I entered high school, between my mother's cold demeanor and Jeffrey's indifference, I felt more like a house guest than family member. Then came the shocking announcement. My mother had decided I would live with my father permanently. The day she invited me to dinner was unusual, just the two of us at the table. Jeffrey was working late, and Chloe was already asleep when my mother started pushing food around her plate, telling me we needed to discuss my future. Her voice was cold and serious, making my stomach instantly tighten with anxiety. I tried to sound casual when I asked what she meant, but my heart was pounding like a drum. She announced they had decided it would be best for me to move in with my father permanently, because the situation at Jeffrey's house was, as she put it, complicated. I nearly choked on my water when I heard those words. Move to Dad's? But I thought things were okay here, I managed to say, though my voice was shaking. My mother sighed with irritation, as if I was being deliberately difficult. She told me I wasn't a child anymore, that I needed my own space, which they couldn't provide here, and frankly, I was becoming an unexpected financial burden. "This is what's best for everyone," she said, as if she'd rehearsed the line. I pushed my plate away, my appetite completely gone. When I asked about my school and friends, she dismissed my concerns, saying I could simply go to a different school and make new friends. The way she spoke about it made it sound like my life was as replaceable as an old piece of furniture. The next few weeks passed in a blur as I packed my life into boxes. My world shrank down to fit into those cardboard containers. Books, clothes, and the few precious mementos that meant something to me. Jeffrey barely said goodbye, and Chloe, too young to understand, gave me a confused hug. The day I moved was heart-wrenching. My father lived in a small apartment on the other side of town. It was clean but frozen in time, filled with memories from when my mother left. He was waiting for me with open arms and a worried smile when I arrived. The apartment was nothing like the house I'd grown up in. My new room was half the size of my old one, with walls that needed painting and a window that faced nothing but brick. But it was quiet, and my father did everything he could to make it comfortable for me. My first day at the new school was brutal. Walking through the crowded hallways, I could feel the stares and hear the whispers. "That's the new girl," they said, like I was some kind of curiosity in a display case. I retreated into myself during classes, doodling in my notebook to block out the whispers. When the bell rang, I was the first one out the door. I didn't want to be home, but my father noticed my distress. He tried to sound cheerful when he asked about my classes. I lied and said they were fine, hanging up my coat and dropping my bag by the door. He told me to let him know if things got tough, reminding me that we were in this together and I wasn't alone. His words meant everything, but the loneliness I felt was deep and raw. It wasn't just missing my old friends and the big house. It was something more profound than that. I felt unwanted, cast aside like a burden they couldn't wait to shed. Adjusting to life at my father's wasn't easy, but I quickly realized something had to change. One morning, I woke up and looked around my small room, deciding it was time to take control of my life. No one else is going to do it for me, I whispered to myself. My father looked up from his coffee immediately, noticing the determination in my voice. He asked what I was thinking about, saying I seemed very determined lately. I stirred my cereal, trying to find the right words. I want to do something for myself, Dad. I can't just stand still anymore. My father nodded solemnly, understanding in his eyes. He asked what my plan was. That scholarship, I declared, more to convince myself than him, the big one for exceptional students. I'm going to win it. My father's smile was all the encouragement I needed. I needed that scholarship, and if anyone was going to earn it, it had to be me. My father simply said to let him know what I needed. School was challenging, with long hours of studying to catch up and even longer afternoons buried in books. The teachers noticed the change in me, and even the strictest ones seemed to recognize my determination. Mr. Derrick, my math teacher, stopped me after class one day. He asked about my improved grades, wondering what had sparked the change. I answered directly, without sugarcoating it, telling him I needed that scholarship. While gathering my things, I added that I had a plan and wasn't going to stay stuck forever. He watched me for a moment before nodding slowly. He told me to keep it up and reminded me he was there if I needed help. Making friends wasn't easy, but I found people who didn't mind my focused determination. At lunch, I sat with Michelle and Daniel. They weren't the popular kids, but they always knew how to laugh. One day, Daniel joked that I was like a library ninja as he set down his lunch tray. I smiled at that. Well, you have to be stealthy to get the good study spots, I replied. Michelle added, in her kind but honest way, that what I was doing was amazing since most people wouldn't even try. Days turned into months, and as the application deadline approached, the pressure mounted. My father was my rock, always making sure I had a warm meal and lending an ear when the stress got too much. The day the scholarship letter arrived, my hands shook as I opened it. My father held his breath alongside me. I read the contents with my heart pounding, then let out a scream so loud the neighbors probably heard. I did it, Dad. I really did it. I jumped up and down, waving the letter like a victory flag. My father clapped and laughed with me, pulling me into a tight embrace. I knew you could do it, I always knew, he told me with pride in his voice. Months later, as I packed my bags for college, I felt ready for the first time. The future looked bright, and for the first time, it felt truly mine. I was leaving, but taking with me all the lessons, love, and hard-won wisdom. After graduating with honors and building a stable career, I finally felt like I had solid ground beneath my feet. At 25, my career was flourishing, and I had started dating a wonderful man from work named William. He had been my constant support through everything. Then, out of the blue, my mother called. We hadn't spoken much since I moved out, but suddenly she was asking me something. Or rather, telling me something. Julia, about your sister. She began. She announced that Chloe would be attending college in my city, and while they would pay her tuition, they thought it best for her to live with me. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a statement of fact. Memories of our strained relationship flashed through my mind, but I hesitated, wanting to believe things could be different this time. "All right, Mom. I'll help Chloe," I replied, hiding my doubts. Maybe this could be a chance to heal things between us. Chloe moved in 2 weeks later, and it quickly became clear how different we were. She was charming as she seemed to always be, appearance conscious, with expensive tastes. She arrived with a suitcase full of expectations and an attitude that suggested they should all be met. "Make sure to get almond milk and kale. I'm on a special diet," she casually mentioned that first night, checking herself in the mirror. "Of course, I'll add it to the shopping list," I responded, trying to be accommodating. But living with Chloe proved harder than I'd anticipated. She would party like there was no tomorrow, coming home at dawn with carefree laughter while I lay awake worried about work meetings and presentations. One evening when William came over, Chloe was getting ready for another night out. I noticed her throwing him overly sweet smiles and lingering looks. After she left, William approached me. He told me uncomfortably that Chloe seemed to be misinterpreting things. She was trying to seduce him. Anger and embarrassment washed over me. "Thank you for telling me. I'll talk to her," I said. When I confronted Chloe, she just laughed. "Come on, Julia. I'm just being friendly. Besides, it's only natural he'd be attracted to me," she said dismissively. "He's my fiancé, Chloe. You need to respect that," I said firmly. Her laugh turned cold. "Julia, I always get what I want," she stated matter-of-factly. That was the last straw. I couldn't live in a situation where I had to protect my own life from my sister. "Find somewhere else to live, Chloe. This isn't working," I told her with finality. When I made it clear the decision was non-negotiable, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. An hour later, the phone rang. It was my mother, her voice cold and sharp. "You're just jealous, Julia. You can't stand to see your sister happy," she accused. "I just want respect, Mom. That's all," I replied, but it felt like talking to a wall. After that, things quieted down between Chloe and me. I heard through the grapevine that she had dropped out of college and was drifting through social circles. I focused on my life with William and my work, rebuilding my boundaries. 3 years flew by after my attempt to repair family relationships. My life was going well, with a promotion at work and things better than ever with William. That's when I heard about Chloe. She was getting married to a wealthy man she'd met. With a mixture of curiosity and goodwill, I called to congratulate her. My mother answered with her usual cold, distant voice. "Mom, I heard about Chloe's wedding." I wanted to offer congratulations. I began, trying to sound cheerful. "Don't bother. You're not invited. It's a wealthy people-only ceremony. We don't need any beggars," she cut like a knife. I gripped the phone tighter, feeling that familiar sting of rejection. "Really, Mom? That's how you want this to be? What were you expecting? You were always a difficult child." "Stay away," she said and hung up. I stood there with the receiver in my hand, the dial tone ringing in my ears. The pain was real, but I wouldn't let it ruin my life. I later heard that Chloe's wedding was an extravagant affair with celebrities and artists in attendance. Time moved on, and so did my life. William proposed, and suddenly I was planning my own wedding. It wouldn't be flashy, but I wanted it filled with love and sincerity. When I told my father, he was overjoyed. "Julia, that's wonderful news. Of course I'll be there. Wouldn't miss it for the world," he said, his voice full of happiness. Encouraged by his reaction, I made one last attempt to bridge the gap with my mother. I dialed her number, my heart pounding as I waited for her to answer. "Mom, I'm getting married." "I'd like you to come," I said, holding my breath. Her response was as cold as a winter wind. "No, Julia. I'm not interested in a gathering of losers. Don't expect anything." Fighting back the pain, I took a deep breath. "All right, Mom. Take care," I said and hung up. I knew this was probably my last attempt to invite my mother into my life. Our wedding was simple but beautiful. My father walked me down the aisle, his presence comforting me. The venue was filled with genuine smiles and sincere blessings, so different from the cold extravagance of Chloe's wedding. Our modest reception was full of laughter, dancing, and shared memories. William and I mingled with friends and family who loved us for who we were, not for money or status. Life was good, and William and I were looking forward to our first child. Then one afternoon, the phone rang, and the voice on the other end made my heart flutter with anxiety. It was my mother, but there were no congratulations. "Julia, we need you to take us in. We're desperate," she blurted out without even a greeting. "Mom, what happened?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. She explained in a panicked voice that everything had fallen apart. Jeffrey's business had failed, they'd mortgaged the house for Chloe's wedding and lost everything, and my sister's marriage had ended with her husband throwing her out and demanding money over her affairs. I took a deep breath, trying to process this flood of information. "Okay, slow down. What exactly are you asking for?" "We all need to come live in your house," she said, as if it were the most natural solution in the world. Her demand, or rather, command, hit me like a physical blow. "No, Mom. You can't just move into our home. That's not how this works. Julia, after everything we've done for you, you owe us this much," she fired back in her imperious voice. That struck a nerve. "Oh, Mom. Remember when I needed you most? You threw me out and prioritized everything over me. And now you want me to open my doors? You're being selfish," she snapped. "Julia, what about family ties? I'm your mother. I've never let you forget that. But being a mother isn't what you think it is. It's not about debts and demands," I shot back sharply. Even through the phone, I could feel her anger radiating. "You'll regret this, Julia. I'll take legal action to get what I deserve." I couldn't help but laugh, though it was more from disbelief than anything else. "Go ahead, try it. Mom, remember when you threw me out? Dad was my legal guardian. What are you going to claim? That the daughter you discarded won't let you parasitize her life?" There was a moment of silence, and I could almost hear her thoughts churning. "This isn't over, Julia," she said and hung up. Life after that final call with my mother felt like a new beginning. A real new beginning. William and I were busy preparing the baby's room, choosing paint colors, assembling the crib, and dealing with the usual ups and downs of pregnancy. One early Friday morning, I was carefully folding and storing newly bought baby clothes in the new dresser. William was in the corner, the electric screwdriver whirring as he assembled something. He paused to wipe sweat from his forehead and smiled at me. "How are you doing, Julia? Need any help?" "I'm fine, thanks. Just thinking about how real this all feels," I replied, touching a tiny, soft bodysuit. "Yeah, we're really going to be parents," William said, his voice mixing surprise and excitement. That's when we heard a knock at the door. I wondered who could be visiting so early on a Friday morning. William went to answer while I continued organizing. I heard voices, then William called out. "Julia, it's for you." Walking into the living room, I was surprised to see my father standing there with a big smile, holding a teddy bear. Surprise, he exclaimed. Dad, what are you doing here? I couldn't hide my joy as I hugged him tight. Just wanted to check on my favorite daughter. And I brought something for my grandchild, he said, handing me the soft, adorable teddy bear. Thank you, Dad. I'm so happy you came, I said, feeling a bit emotional. We sat down, and my father looked around at the half-assembled furniture and stacks of parenting books. Looks like you're almost ready to welcome this little one, he remarked. We're trying. I'm excited though, I said, pausing to bite my lip. Dad, I talked to Mom again. It didn't go well. His expression turned serious. I heard from your mother. She wasn't too happy, was she? No, she wasn't pleased. But Dad, I stood my ground. For me, for William, and for the baby. We need peace here, I said firmly. We spent the day together, listening to his unsolicited, but delightful, parenting advice and just enjoying each other's company. It was a good day. As the sunset painted the sky orange and pink, it felt like one of those moments you keep forever in your heart. William, Dad, and I sat on the porch, where a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. William held me close, and I leaned into him. Despite everything with Mom and all the drama, I feel lucky that we have each other and that we're starting this wonderful new chapter. I have a feeling it's going to be amazing, I said, gazing at the twilight. William kissed the top of my head. It will be. We've got this, Julia. As night fell and Dad prepared to leave, I felt a deep contentment and readiness for what was to come. The pain with my mother and the uncertainty of new beginnings had been difficult, but they had led me to this moment. This moment surrounded by love and support.